Hello, everyone, and thank you for having us today. We are from the Queen's MMA program, class of 2018. Our group, the Section B Allstars, chose to focus our analysis on a global food security index and drew many conclusions from that. Our team consists of Leo Lee, Joey Guo, Calvin Ho, Kathy Liu, and myself, Paul Beaton. And I'll be taking you through the analysis that we did and the conclusions we came to. So I just want to start off by introducing the problem. Um, right now, 1 billion people are suffering from hunger due to a myriad of things, but really ultimately, there were some big metrics that stuck out in our data, and those were affordability issues, availability issues, and quality and safety issues. So our mission in this project is to leverage that data to utilize analytics and identify some of these key problems and come to a solution that we're going to take you through. First, to tell you about the data, basically the data set consisted of over 100 different countries, 139 countries to be specific. It has ratings across 63 metrics, and the metrics, the main groupings of the metrics were affordability, availability, quality and safety, as I outlined earlier, and natural resources and resilience. And within each of those main groupings, there was different rating systems based on more granular items there. You can see in the data set here that, if you take, for example, the first main grouping, affordability, that's broken down into food consumption as a share of household expenditure. All the 139 countries were rated on a scale of 1 to 100. And you can see a snapshot of the first 6 countries here. They were rated on proportion of population under the global poverty line. They were rated on gross domestic product per capita. This itself is just a snapshot. There are, as I said, 63 different metrics, and all of them went together into an affordability score, an availability score, and a quality score, to which we drew our data from. So basically, our solution is we want a customized policy. Giving the Global Food Security Index, really it is hard to reach a unified solution for all courtiers. Obviously, it's a global problem and a large scale one at that. So we wanted to group similar countries into different clusters and develop a customized recommendation for each segment. And to do that, we applied a pretty simple cluster analysis. You can see the cluster analysis down here, major groupings across the 139 countries. And to explain briefly what those clusters kind of looked like, this first group in here, very well-fed countries. They're the developed countries. It's US, Canada, the United Kingdom, Japan, and they ranked very highly on this Global Food Security Index. The second grouping in here, countries that are moving fast to catch up to these developed countries, but they still face a lot of challenges. There are some food security issues, a lot of population density issues in China and India in this grouping here, and I'll get into that a little further in a few minutes here. And then as we move further down, we start to see even more food insecurity issues. This third grouping are really resource-hungry countries. Their situations are mainly due to bad environment, a lot of lacking resources. Myanmar, Honduras is in there. And this fourth one is the problem cluster, struggling countries that are facing wars, disasters, and very, very tough to acquire food. In countries like this, countries like Congo, Sudan, and Syria all make up that cluster. So just to give you an idea of the difference of all these clusters, the chart here shows you an average score across all the countries in the dotted line, and we basically chose one country at random from each cluster to kind of give you a picture of how they relate to the global average on this food security index. We'll start here with Myanmar, who Myanmar was in the cluster, the third cluster down that had a very resource hungry country, but definitely not among the worst. Myanmar, you can see they're quite close to the global average in terms of quality and safety and availability, but really starting to lack in affordability and definitely a lot more developing countries in that cluster. China, similarly, coming from the second grouping of clusters, countries that are moving fast to catch up to the developed nations. And you can see that a country like China is actually over benchmark on the affordability scale and on a quality and safety metric, right about on average for availability. And that was typical of China and India, where the population density was very, very heavy there. Now, when we move down to Uganda here, one of the countries from our fourth clustering of very struggling countries, you can see how far below the average score this country falls, and across all three metrics, it's below score there. And now we compare that over to Canada, among the developed countries, U.S., U.K., Japan, in that cluster. You can see how far above the average score these countries are across all three metrics. So we really wanted to paint the picture of that difference. I think that comes across really well there. So how do we solve this? What's our solution? Basically, you see the map in front of you here shows the different countries across the world and where they fit in our clustering based solely on quality and safety. I'm going to start with quality and safety, and I'll talk about affordability and availability in a bit. What we want to do is establish connections between these countries, especially if they're landlocked, if they share a border. And we think this is going to really help these countries share the successes of food quality and safety. It's going to help them share resources and help them share information and as much as they possibly can. And it's going to come from a neighboring country, so we hope that comes from kind of a friendly face, a country where a lot of the cultures are very similar. Let's take, for example, down in here you see Chile and Bolivia. Chile, or at least across the cluster that Chile was in, the average rating for food quality and safety was 82, whereas just a little north and to the east is Bolivia, and in their cluster the average rating is 53. So big difference there, and not a lot of difference in proximity. By leveraging the UN, we think we can really start to create a connection with that. Similarly, in affordability, same map, same clusters, you're going to see that. Again, let's look at Chile and Bolivia. This time it's even more pronounced score. Chile had an average, or rather Chile's cluster had an average affordability score of 80, more of an economically booming country, and Bolivia, or rather Bolivia's cluster, an average score of 48. You can see that right there. Again, with availability, the same conclusion applies. So, you can see a lot of the kind of countries that we've mapped out here that can be very beneficial to some of the more developing nations that have a high food security index in this case. Something that was interesting about the natural resources and resilience metric that we measured, we saw some really low scores in terms of natural resources in Africa and East Africa, actually following some other data that we were looking at in the preliminary stages of this project that focused on the global hunger index and basically outlined some of the worst countries for global hunger, stuff where houses were under the poverty line and food was scarce. A lot of those countries coming from East Africa. And so that followed the same kind of picture that this data was telling us. So in conclusion, really our analysis is showing that we need to apply a customized policy across these countries in the different segmentations that I mentioned earlier. And we need to build a connection between these countries, kind of create buddy countries, sister countries to utilize those resources, and sharing of information. We think is going to make a huge difference in the disparity of global food security. Well, thank you so much for your time. Again, my name is Paul Beaton. I'm here with Leo Lee, Kathy Liu, Calvin Ho, and Joey Guo, and we hope this analysis uh, comes to some huge conclusions.